The massive starship Sol Ambassador glided through the dark void of space, its sleek silver hull reflecting the light of the twin suns of Sal Toreth, the capital world of the mighty Zorani Empire. Inside, Ethan Voss, humanity's top diplomat, stood near the viewing window, watching as the planet grew larger with every passing second. The Zorani were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds, crushed entire fleets, and forced many civilizations into submission. Yet, despite their strength, they had never fought a race like humans. The war between Earth and the Zorani had lasted only a few years, but it had changed everything. Humanity, though technologically behind the Zorani, had proven far more resilient than expected. Their tactics, adaptability, and sheer stubbornness had made the war costly for the Empire. And now, both sides had agreed to negotiate peace. That was why Ethan was here. He had come to Sal Toreth with one mission: to make sure humanity's future was secured. A sharp beep interrupted his thoughts. The ship's AI, Vega, spoke in her usual calm tone. "Ambassador Voss, we have received landing clearance from the Zorani Royal Palace. Estimated arrival: 5 minutes." Ethan took a deep breath and straightened his suit. He had faced alien warlords, corrupt politicians, and near-death situations before, but even he had to admit, this was different. The city of the conquerors. The landing pad was massive, built to hold warships far larger than Ethan's diplomatic vessel. Towering spires of black stone rose into the crimson sky, each one carved with ancient battle inscriptions. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and metal, a mix of tradition and industry that defined the Zorani way of life. A group of Zorani warriors stood waiting for him, their golden armor gleaming under the sunlight. They were taller than humans, with broad shoulders, deep violet skin, and glowing amber eyes. Their leader, a towering warrior with scars across his face, stepped forward. "I am Commander Kelroth, personal guard of Queen Xyrevex. You will follow me." His voice was deep, firm, and left no room for argument. Ethan simply nodded and walked beside him, flanked by guards on all sides. He had expected this. The Zorani respected power, and this was their way of reminding him that he was on their turf now. As they moved through the grand corridors of the palace, Ethan couldn't help but admire the architecture. Everything was built for warriors: massive halls, intricate murals of past battles, and statues of legendary conquerors. It was a kingdom carved from war itself. Finally, they arrived at a massive chamber. The doors, made of dark obsidian, slid open with a deep, rumbling sound. Inside, at the center of a grand throne room, sat Queen Xyrevex. The queen's offer. Ethan had seen images of the Zorani ruler before, but nothing compared to seeing her in person. Queen Xyrevex was unlike any warrior in the room. Her armor was lighter, more refined, crafted with precision rather than brute strength. Her violet skin shimmered under the golden light of the throne room, and her sharp, glowing eyes studied Ethan with curiosity. Unlike the other Zorani, who carried an air of aggression, she radiated control. The hall was silent as Ethan approached. He knew what was expected: strength, not submission. So instead of bowing, he met the queen's gaze with steady confidence. A slow smile spread across her face. "Humanity has proven." "Interesting," she said, her voice smooth but commanding. "You are weaker than us, slower, yet you do not break." Ethan gave a small, knowing smile. "We tend to surprise people." The queen let out a deep chuckle. "Yes, you do, and now you stand before me, a representative of Earth, seeking peace. But tell me, why should I allow it?" Ethan had expected this. The Zorani didn't respect words alone. They needed proof. "You are strong," he said, "but even the strongest empires can fall. Humanity may be smaller, but we adapt. We endure. Fighting us will only weaken your empire, but an alliance, that could make both our people stronger." The queen leaned forward, resting her chin on one hand. A bold claim. Then she stood. The entire room seemed to shift as her presence filled the space. "I have tested many leaders," she said. "Some begged, some threatened, some tried to deceive me. But you? I wonder." She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. Then, with a slow, deliberate smile, she spoke the words that changed everything. "As a royal welcome, I offer you a night in my palace." A murmur spread through the room. Ethan knew enough about Zorani culture to understand what she was doing. This was no mere invitation. This was a test, a challenge, a trial that no outsider had ever faced before. Ethan's heart pounded, but he didn't let it show. He simply met her gaze and gave a slow nod. "I accept." The Queen's smile widened. "Good." And with that, the doors behind her opened, revealing the path that would decide humanity's fate. The massive doors slid shut behind Ethan Voss, sealing him inside the Queen's private chambers. The air was warm, carrying a faint scent of exotic spices and something else, metal and stone, like a battlefield long forgotten. The room was vast, its ceiling carved with ancient Zorani symbols of conquest. At the center, Queen HFY stood, her piercing amber eyes locked onto him. She had changed from her ceremonial armor into something lighter, a battle robe with golden embroidery, the mark of Zorani royalty. She looked relaxed, yet there was something dangerous in the way she moved, like a predator studying its prey. Ethan remained calm, his training as a diplomat keeping his face neutral. But inside, he was analyzing everything. The Queen was testing him, that much was clear. The question was how. "Tell me, Ethan Voss," the Queen said, her voice smooth but commanding. "Do you know why I offered you this night?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "Because this is a test." And Ravex smiled, showing sharp, white teeth. "Good. You are not a fool. Many would think this is an honor, but you know better." She gestured toward a long, low table where 2 cups of Zorani fire wine sat, steam rising from their surface. She took one and motioned for Ethan to take the other. He hesitated for only a second before lifting the cup. He had studied Zorani customs. Refusing a drink from royalty was a sign of weakness. He took a sip. The liquid burned like liquid fire, sending heat through his body. He didn't flinch. The Queen watched him with approval. "You have courage. That is good. But courage alone is not enough. Strength alone is not enough. The Zorani respect those who endure." She placed her cup down. The air grew heavier. Ethan tensed as she stepped forward, circling him like a warrior studying an opponent. "The trial of kings," she said slowly. "It is a test given only to those we deem worthy of standing among us. No alien has ever faced it." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "And how many have survived it?" The Queen smirked. "None." "The trial begins." A deep rumbling echoed through the chamber. Suddenly, the floor beneath Ethan shifted, separating into massive stone slabs that began to descend. The walls pulled back, revealing an arena. The polished floor was replaced by rough stone, and strange golden orbs floated in the air, casting eerie shadows. Ethan's muscles tensed as 3 Zorani warriors emerged from the shadows, their armor adorned with ancient markings. They were built like tanks, their violet skin gleaming under the lights. Each carried a different weapon. One held a curved blade, another a long staff, and the last, his own hands, massive and powerful. The Queen raised her hand. "Your first test is simple." She pointed at the warriors. "Survive." Ethan didn't have a weapon. He didn't have armor. He only had his mind. The first warrior lunged, blade flashing toward his chest. Ethan moved, not back, but forward. He sidestepped at the last second, using the warrior's momentum against him. The Zorani stumbled, caught off balance for only a moment. But that moment was all Ethan needed. He grabbed a loose stone from the ground and slammed it into the warrior's knee. A sharp grunt of pain followed as the Zorani staggered. The second warrior was already attacking, spinning his staff toward Ethan's ribs. Ethan ducked, rolling across the ground just as the staff cracked the stone where he had been standing. Dust exploded into the air. He needed to think fast. Strength wouldn't win this fight. He wasn't stronger than them, but he was smarter. He noticed the floating golden orbs. They pulsed with energy. If they were some kind of power source. The third warrior charged, swinging a massive fist. Ethan twisted away, barely avoiding the impact. Too close. He needed an opening. Then he saw it. The orbs. Darting toward one, he reached out and felt a pulse of energy vibrate through his fingers. It was charged with static electricity, highly conductive. An idea formed. He pivoted toward the warrior with the staff and threw the orb at him. The moment it made contact, a blast of electric energy surged through the Zorani's armor, sending him crashing to the ground, stunned. Ethan didn't stop. He grabbed another orb and hurled it at the second warrior, shocking him as well. The third warrior hesitated just for a second. That was all Ethan needed. He leaped forward and smashed the last orb against the warrior's chest. A burst of golden sparks filled the air. The warrior groaned before collapsing. Silence. Then the queen laughed. A worthy opponent. Ethan turned, chest rising and falling with each breath. Queen Cyravex's expression was unreadable. Then she stepped forward and placed a single hand on his shoulder. "No alien has ever passed the first trial," she murmured. "You did not use strength, but you won." Ethan straightened, meeting her gaze. "I told you, humans don't break." For the first time, the queen looked, amused, impressed. She turned toward the towering doors at the other end of the arena. With a single motion, they rumbled open, revealing a staircase leading into darkness. "The first test is complete," she said. "Now we begin the true trial." Ethan exhaled. His mind raced. If that was only the beginning, what came next? He clenched his fists. Whatever it was, he would not back down. He had a mission. He had a people to protect. And he wasn't done yet. The great doors groaned as they slid open, revealing a long, winding staircase that disappeared into darkness. A faint golden light pulsed from the walls, casting eerie shadows that flickered like ghostly figures. Ethan Voss took a deep breath. His body ached from the first trial, but he had no time to rest. The real test was just beginning. Queen Cyravex stepped forward, her movements slow but deliberate. "You have proven you can survive a fight," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "But war is not only about combat. A true leader must have wisdom, patience, and the will to face the unknown." Ethan wiped a streak of sweat from his brow. "I take it this next test won't be as simple as fighting 3 warriors." The queen chuckled. "No, Ambassador. Now you must prove your mind is as strong as your body." She gestured toward the staircase. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped into the darkness. The path of shadows. The moment he descended, the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. The only sound was the soft echo of his footsteps against stone. The golden glow from the walls faded, leaving him in near-complete darkness. A whisper echoed through the air. It wasn't a voice. It was something else, a presence, ancient and unseen. Then, without warning, the ground vanished beneath his feet. Ethan gasped as he fell, the air rushing past him. His arms flailed, but there was nothing to grab. The fall seemed endless, until, suddenly, he stopped. Not with a crash, not with pain, just stillness. He was standing again, though he didn't remember landing. Around him, the darkness had changed. Shapes moved within the shadows, twisting and shifting like living things. A deep, rumbling voice filled the air. It was not the queen. "Who are you?" Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. "I am Ethan Voss, diplomat of Earth." The voice growled, ancient and unreadable. "Why have you come?" He steadied his breathing. To seek peace between my people and the Zorani. The darkness swirled. The shadows took form. Figures appeared, human soldiers, beaten and bloody, their faces twisted in agony. They reached out toward him, eyes filled with desperation. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Ethan's stomach twisted. He recognized some of them. They were real. Friends, fellow officers, people he had fought beside during the war. And they were all dead. Your people die, the voice whispered. You cannot save them. Ethan clenched his fists. He had lost many good men and women in the war. He had seen ships explode, heard the screams over the radio, felt the helplessness of knowing he couldn't stop it. But he also knew one thing. They hadn't died for nothing. They fought because they believed in something greater than themselves, he said, his voice steady. They knew the risks, and they still stood their ground. That is what makes humans strong. We fight. We endure. The shadows shuddered, as if the darkness itself was uncertain. Then the voice laughed. The figures vanished. The darkness melted away, revealing a new room. A massive hall lined with towering statues of ancient Zorani warriors. A single path led forward, where Queen HFY stood waiting. Ethan exhaled, stepping toward her. She studied him with an unreadable expression. You have faced the trial of shadows. You did not break. He nodded, his mind still reeling from what he had seen. Was that real? The queen smirked. Does it matter? Ethan frowned, but didn't argue. He had passed the test. That was what mattered. The final trial. HFY led him to the center of the chamber, where a massive stone pedestal stood. Atop it rested a single glowing blade. This is your final test, she said. The Blade of Kings. It has belonged to Zorani rulers for centuries. Ethan studied the weapon. It was beautiful, long and sharp, glowing with a soft golden light. But he knew there had to be more to this test than simply picking it up. The queen stepped closer. To wield it is to accept the burden of leadership. Strength is easy. Wisdom is hard. If you take the blade, you must make a choice. Ethan frowned. What kind of choice? She gestured toward two doors on either side of the chamber. One path leads to power, she said. If you take it, the Zorani will recognize humanity's strength. We will forge an alliance, but on my terms. Your people will fight beside us. Follow our ways, become part of the empire. She pointed to the other door. The second path leads to defiance. If you take it, you prove that humans will never bow. The Zorani will respect you, but there will be no alliance. You will leave as an equal, but as an enemy. Ethan's heart pounded. This was it, the real test. Would he accept power at the cost of Earth's independence, or walk away and risk war? The queen watched him carefully. Choose. Ethan looked at the blade. He thought of everything humanity had fought for, every sacrifice, every battle. Then, slowly, he reached out and closed his hand around the hilt. The blade pulsed with energy. The queen's eyes widened slightly. Then, Ethan did something she did not expect. He lifted the blade and placed it back on the pedestal. The chamber was silent. Ethan turned to face her. Humanity doesn't need to kneel for an alliance, and we don't need to be enemies either. He met her gaze. We can stand as equals. For a long moment, HFY said nothing. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. Interesting. She stepped forward and placed a single hand on his shoulder. You may yet be worthy of the Zorani. Ethan exhaled. He had passed. But he knew this was only the beginning. Ethan Voss stood firm as Queen HFY removed her hand from his shoulder. The ancient chamber around them pulsed with a golden glow, the energy of the Blade of Kings still humming in the air. He had made his choice. He would not kneel. He would not bow. But he would not seek war either. The queen's amber eyes studied him for a long moment. Then she turned toward the massive doors ahead. You have passed the trial of shadows. You have faced the blade of kings. But there is one final challenge before you leave this chamber as an equal. Ethan tensed. Another test. HFY gave a small, knowing smile. Not from me. The doors rumbled open, revealing a grand throne hall. It was vast, lined with towering statues of past Zorani rulers. Banners of deep crimson and gold hung from the high ceiling, and at the far end of the hall, seated upon elevated stone seats, were the warlords of Zorani Prime. There were 6 of them, each a leader of the most powerful warrior clans. They were massive, their violet skin gleaming under the dim lights, their armor adorned with ancient markings of victory. They had ruled through strength, through battle, through conquest. And now, they would decide whether Ethan Voss was truly worthy. The Circle of Judgment. Ethan stepped into the hall, his boots echoing against the polished stone. The warlords watched him with cold, unreadable expressions. They did not see him as an ally. Not yet. A deep voice broke the silence. This is the human. The speaker was Warlord Karath, the largest of the 6, his armor a deep shade of red. A scar ran from his forehead down to his jaw, a mark of an old battle, one he had clearly survived. He is small, said another warlord, his tone filled with skepticism. He defeated our warriors, Queen HFY reminded them, and passed the trial of shadows, another warlord murmured, narrowing his eyes. Karath leaned forward, his heavy fists pressing into the stone armrests of his seat. The Queen speaks highly of you, human, he said, his voice like rolling thunder. But words mean nothing. We are warriors. Strength means everything. Ethan stayed calm. He had expected this. Another warlord, Mazor, sneered. You had a chance to claim the Blade of Kings, yet you refused it. His sharp, silver eyes locked onto Ethan. Why should we respect a leader who does not seize power when it is offered? Ethan met his gaze. Because true strength isn't about taking power, he said. It's about knowing when to use it, and when not to. The warlords exchanged glances. Some looked amused, others unimpressed. Karath's expression darkened. You say that now. But when your people are at war, when your home burns, will you still refuse power? Ethan's jaw tightened. If that time comes, I will fight. Not for conquest, not for dominance, but to protect my people. He took a step closer, just as you fight for yours. The hall was silent. The warlords stared at him, their expressions unreadable. Then Karath stood. He was massive, towering over Ethan like a mountain. His heavy boots struck the ground with a deep thud as he stepped forward. The room tensed. Karath reached for the massive axe strapped to his back. With one smooth motion, he swung it, burying it into the stone floor at Ethan's feet. Ethan didn't flinch. The warlord studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. You have spirit, human, Karath said. Perhaps more than I expected. One by one, the other warlords rose from their seats. You are bold, said Mazor. You are not weak, another admitted. The queen watched with a knowing look as the warlords slowly nodded their approval. At last, Karath stepped back and raised his voice. Then let it be known, the warlords of Zorani Prime recognize Ethan Voss, diplomat of Earth, as a leader worthy of standing among us. A deep roar of approval filled the hall. An uncertain future. As the warlords returned to their seats, Queen HFY turned to Ethan. You have done what no human has done before, she said. You have earned the respect of the Zorani. Your people will not be seen as weak. Ethan exhaled slowly. The weight of what had just happened settled in. This was bigger than himself, bigger than this moment. This was history. So what happens now? He asked. HFY's expression grew serious. The warlords respect you, but do not mistake this for peace. There are those who still believe your people are a threat, those who would see you fall. Ethan nodded. I expected as much. Karath smirked. Then you are not a fool. The queen continued. But for now, you will return to your people. As an equal. As a voice of diplomacy. And perhaps in time, as an ally. Ethan straightened. This was what he had come for. Not war, not submission, but understanding. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. HFY stepped forward, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You intrigue me, human. Perhaps our paths will cross again. Ethan met her gaze. I have a feeling they will. With that, the queen gestured toward the great doors. Go, ambassador of Earth. Tell your people what has happened here. Ethan took one last look at the warlords, at the queen, at the hall where history had been made. Then he turned and walked toward the doors. As they rumbled open, revealing the path back to his ship, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The deep hum of the starship's engines filled the cabin as Ethan Voss sat in his seat, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The Zorani homeworld, with its glowing crimson surface and towering cities, shrank behind him as his ship accelerated toward Earth. His mission had been a success, at least for now. The queen of the Zorani, Sci-Fi, had acknowledged humanity's strength. The warlords had granted him respect. Humanity would no longer be seen as weak. But respect was not peace, and as Ethan leaned back in his seat, he knew his real challenge was only beginning. How would Earth respond to what he had done? The briefing room. The moment Ethan's ship touched down at Luna Base, the main human outpost on the moon, he was escorted to a secure briefing room. The air was tense. A group of top military officials and government leaders were already waiting for him. At the head of the table sat General Marcus Holloway, the supreme commander of Earth's defense forces. His sharp eyes locked onto Ethan as he entered. Ambassador Voss, Holloway said, his voice firm. We've been waiting. Ethan took his seat. I assume you already have my preliminary report. We do, said Ambassador Sarah Chen, Earth's lead diplomat. But we want to hear it from you. Ethan nodded. He glanced around the room. Some faces were curious. Some were skeptical. Some were outright hostile. He took a deep breath. This was another battlefield, one of words and strategy. The Zorani are not our enemies, he began, but they are not our allies either. They respect strength, not diplomacy. I had to prove that humanity was not weak. General Holloway folded his arms. And how did you do that? Ethan met his gaze. By fighting, by enduring their trials, by showing them that humans will not bow, but we also do not seek unnecessary war. A murmur passed through the room. Some were impressed. Others remained silent. Ambassador Chen leaned forward. And what of the Queen? Does she seek peace? Ethan hesitated. She is interested in us. She sees potential in humanity. But she is cautious. The warlords are even more so. Holloway's expression darkened. Potential for what? Ethan exhaled. They will not attack us without reason. But if they ever see us as weak again, they won't hesitate. Silence filled the room. The weight of his words settled over them. Then General Holloway stood. So we cannot afford to be weak. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had expected this reaction. Holloway was a soldier, not a diplomat. He saw strength only in terms of weapons and war. Strength isn't just about war, General, Ethan said carefully. It's about how we present ourselves. If we act with caution and confidence, we can avoid unnecessary conflict. Holloway scoffed. And if they decide we are a threat anyway? Ethan didn't blink. Then we fight. The room went still. Then Holloway smiled. It was a small, approving smile. Good, he said. Then we prepare. Ethan wanted to argue, to say that war wasn't the only path. But he also knew that preparedness wasn't the same as aggression. For now, this was the best outcome he could hope for. A private meeting. After the main briefing, Ambassador Chen pulled Ethan aside. They stood near a wide observation window, looking out at Earth below. The blue and green planet spun slowly, a reminder of what they were trying to protect. "You did well in there," Chen said. Ethan sighed. "I'm not sure. Holloway still wants to prepare for war." Chen gave him a knowing look. "That's his job. But your job is different." Ethan turned to her. "What do you mean?" She crossed her arms. "The Queen is interested in humanity. That means we have an opportunity. You made history, Ethan. You stood before one of the most powerful warrior races in the galaxy and walked away as an equal. That gives us an advantage." Ethan considered her words. "So what's the next step?" Chen's lips curved into a small smile. "You go back." Ethan blinked. "Back to Zorani Prime." She nodded. "This isn't a one-time mission. The Queen opened a door, and we need to keep it open. You are now our official envoy to the Zorani." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He had barely returned, and now they wanted to send him back. Chen smirked at his reaction. "You didn't think this was over, did you?" Ethan chuckled. "No, I suppose not." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Get some rest. You'll need it. A message from the Queen." Later that night, as Ethan sat alone in his quarters, his personal communicator beeped. He frowned. An encrypted message. He activated the screen. A hologram appeared. Queen Sci-Fi. Ambassador Voss. Her voice was smooth, controlled. "I trust you have returned safely to your world." Ethan leaned forward. "I have. And I've told them what happened." The Queen tilted her head slightly. "And do they fear us?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "They respect you. Some more than others." Saravex's lips curled into a small smile. "Good. Respect is the foundation of all things." A pause. Then her expression grew serious. "There are those among my people who still doubt you. They watch and wait. Be careful, human." Ethan exhaled. The political game had begun. "I understand." The Queen nodded. "Then we shall speak again soon. Until then, remain strong." The hologram vanished. Ethan sat back, rubbing his temples. The mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, the whole galaxy was watching. The distant glow of Zorani Prime filled Ethan Voss's viewport as his starship approached the alien world once again. He had barely rested since returning to Earth, but there was no time to waste. Queen Sci-Fi had summoned him back. A request, a warning. Ethan wasn't sure. What he did know was that his mission had changed. This was no longer just about proving humanity's strength. Now, it was about survival. The Zorani had accepted him, but not all of them wanted peace. As the ship descended into the planet's atmosphere, Ethan tightened his grip on the armrests. This time, he wasn't just stepping into a foreign empire. He was stepping into a battlefield of hidden enemies. The Queen's warning. Ethan walked through the grand halls of the royal palace, his boots echoing against the polished stone. Towering guards flanked him, their golden armor gleaming under the massive banners of the Zorani Empire. The Queen awaited him in her private chamber. When he entered, she stood near a vast window, watching the alien sky. "You came quickly," Sci-Fi said without turning. "You made it sound urgent," Ethan replied. The Queen finally faced him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes. Something tense. "The warlords gave their respect to you, but respect is not loyalty," she said. Ethan nodded. "I expected that." Sci-Fi took a step closer. "There are those who see you as a threat, Ambassador Voss. Not just you, your entire species." Ethan exhaled. "You're talking about the Zorani High Council, aren't you?" The Queen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Some of them support me. Others whisper of war." Ethan folded his arms. "And what do these whispers say?" Sci-Fi's voice lowered. "That humans are unpredictable. That they should not be treated as equals but as potential enemies. And some, she hesitated, some believe you should not leave this planet alive. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had expected danger, but this was worse. I assume that's why you called me back, he said carefully. The Queen nodded. You have allies, but you also have enemies. Someone will try to test you. They will provoke you, perhaps even frame you. Her golden eyes locked onto his. You must not give them a reason to strike first. Ethan's jaw clenched. This was a game of power now. A dangerous one. The warlords' challenge. Later that evening, Ethan was summoned to the council chamber, where the warlords and the High Council members gathered. It was a vast, circular room with an open ceiling that revealed the night sky. The Zorani High Council, elders dressed in flowing ceremonial robes, stood on one side. The warlords, armored and powerful, stood on the other. Ethan could feel the tension the moment he entered. Some of these people wanted him gone. At the center of the room stood Warlord Karath, the same warrior who had tested him before. His scared face was unreadable as he stepped forward. This human walks among us again, Karath declared. His deep voice filled the chamber. But words and titles are not enough. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What are you suggesting? Karath's mouth curled into a smirk. A test. One last test to prove that humans deserve to stand as equals. Ethan exhaled. Of course. Another test. What kind of test? He asked. Another warlord, Muzor, stepped forward. A hunt. In the jungles of the Forbidden Lands. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Even some council members looked uneasy. Ethan had studied Zorani history before coming here. The Forbidden Lands were dangerous, ancient, untouched jungles filled with deadly creatures no outsider had ever entered. And now, they wanted him to go alone. Queen Cyrevex's voice cut through the noise. This was not part of our agreement. Karath turned to her, then let the human refuse. Let him admit he does not belong. Ethan clenched his fists. This was a trap. If he refused, they would say he was weak. If he went and failed, they would call him unworthy. But if he survived, he took a step forward. Fine, I'll do it. Silence filled the room. Some were surprised, others amused. Karath grinned, then let the hunt begin. Into the wild. The next morning, Ethan stood at the edge of the Forbidden Lands. Dense jungle stretched before him, filled with towering trees and vines as thick as his arms. The air was heavy with the scent of alien plants. Strange sounds echoed from within. A Zorani warrior handed him a simple blade. No weapons beyond this, the warrior said. Survive until dawn, and you will have proven your worth. Ethan took the blade. Simple enough. Karath smirked. We shall see. Without another word, Ethan stepped into the jungle. The hunt had begun. The first attack. The jungle was alive. Strange creatures moved in the shadows. Insects the size of his hand crawled over glowing plants. Somewhere in the distance, a deep guttural growl rumbled through the air. Ethan moved carefully. His training in survival would be tested here. He found a vantage point on a rocky ledge and scanned the area. Then, a movement in the trees. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He ducked just in time as a massive creature lunged from the shadows. It was a Zorani shadow beast, a four-legged predator with black scales and glowing red eyes. Its claws tore through the ground where he had just been standing. Ethan rolled to the side, gripping his blade. The beast turned, snarling, its eyes locked onto him. This wasn't just survival. This was a fight. The beast lunged again. Ethan dodged, slashing with his blade, cutting into its thick hide. It roared in pain, but it wasn't down yet. Ethan exhaled. If this was only the first attack, the night was going to be long. And he wasn't sure if he was truly alone in this jungle. The Zorani jungle was alive with danger. Ethan Voss stood with his back against a thick tree, his breathing controlled but steady. The shadow beast he had wounded was still circling him. Its red eyes glowed in the dark, and its growl rumbled through the air. Ethan gripped his blade tightly. Survive until dawn. That was the test. But he knew this was more than survival. This was a trap. The warlords wanted to see him fail. But he wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. The beast lunged again. Ethan dodged, rolling to the side, and slashed with his blade. The creature roared in pain as his strike cut across its leg. It staggered but didn't fall. Ethan knew he couldn't fight it forever. He needed a plan. The hunter becomes the hunted. He moved swiftly through the dense foliage, using the terrain to his advantage. He climbed up a large rock formation and hid behind a twisted tree branch, waiting. The beast followed, sniffing the air. It was injured but still dangerous. Ethan grabbed a sharp stone and tossed it to his right. The sound made the beast turn, its ears twitching. That was his chance. He leaped down, landing on the creature's back. With all his strength, he drove his blade deep into its neck. The beast let out a final roar before collapsing to the ground. It was over. Ethan pulled out his blade, breathing hard. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked up at the sky. The night was not over yet. He still had hours until dawn. And he knew this was just the beginning. The hidden enemy. Ethan didn't have time to rest. As he moved through the jungle, he felt something watching him. It wasn't a beast. It was something else, something intelligent. Then he saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. A Zorani warrior. Ethan's mind raced. This was supposed to be a survival test. Why was there another warrior here? Then it clicked. This wasn't part of the test. This was an assassination attempt. Ethan pressed his back against a tree and listened. More than one. They were moving quietly, skilled in the ways of stealth. The queen had warned him. Some saw him as a threat. And now, they were trying to remove him. Ethan had a choice. Keep hiding or fight back. He chose to fight. The assassin's strike. The first assassin moved swiftly, a curved Zorani dagger in hand. Ethan barely dodged the attack, rolling across the dirt. The second assassin lunged from the shadows. Ethan blocked the strike with his blade, but the force sent him stumbling back. These warriors were fast. They wanted him dead, and they weren't playing games. Ethan focused, speed and precision. That was the key. The first assassin attacked again, but Ethan was ready. He sidestepped and countered, slashing across the warrior's arm. The attacker hissed in pain and fell back. The second assassin hesitated. Ethan saw his opening. He lunged forward, using all his strength, and knocked the warrior's weapon aside. In one swift move, he struck the warrior in the chest with the hilt of his blade. The assassin fell to the ground, unconscious. The first assassin, now injured, vanished into the jungle. Ethan exhaled. They had underestimated him. But now he had proof. Someone within the High Council had sent assassins to kill him. The return to the council. The sky began to brighten. The jungle slowly came to life with the sounds of morning. Ethan emerged from the Forbidden Lands, bloody but standing tall. The warlords and the High Council were waiting. Karath, the warlord who had challenged him, smirked. You survived. Ethan met his gaze. Not just survived. He tossed something onto the ground, a small dagger with a royal insignia. Gasps spread through the crowd. The dagger belonged to a member of the High Council. Saravex's golden eyes narrowed. Explain. Ethan's voice was steady. Someone sent assassins to kill me. He looked around, scanning the faces of the High Council. One of them was responsible. Karath stepped forward, his expression turning serious. Even a warrior like him understood honor. This is a coward's act. A murmur passed through the council. Someone had broken their own rules. Queen Xeravex turned to the High Council, her voice commanding. Who among you has betrayed our law? Silence. No one spoke. But Ethan could see the tension. The guilty one was here, but they were too careful to reveal themselves. The queen turned back to Ethan. This attempt on your life will not go unanswered. You have proven yourself beyond doubt. She stepped forward, her voice echoing through the chamber. From this day forward, humanity will be recognized as an equal race among the Zorani Empire. The warlords pounded their fists against their chests in approval. The High Council, though silent, could not deny what had happened. Ethan had won. A new future. Later that evening, Ethan stood on the palace balcony, watching the alien sky. Queen HFY joined him. You have changed things, Ambassador Voss. Ethan nodded. For the better, I hope. The queen gave a small smile. Time will tell. There are still those who fear your people, and the one who sent those assassins is still out there. Ethan exhaled. Then I guess my work isn't done. HFY studied him for a moment. You are different from the others I have met. Perhaps that is why you have succeeded. Ethan turned to her. And perhaps that is why humanity and the Zorani have a future together. The queen nodded. Perhaps. As the stars shined above, Ethan knew this was not the end. It was just the beginning. A new alliance had been born, but hidden enemies remained, and the galaxy was watching.